I'm sure you guys have heard about this, but something that I've been hearing about a lot is how our birth rates seem to be declining in the West. We used to think that the birth rate decline was like a Japan problem, a South Korea problem, but it seems like in the West, we're beginning to observe that trend. And I know in Europe, Spain has been describing they have birth rate issues as well. That is legit, and I can understand the concern, especially when it's described by how there's going to come a point in which we will probably have a generation that has aged more than a generation that has young people to replace those aging people, and how there won't be enough young people to serve those older. But I don't know about you guys. Something I don't hear being discussed much is the education winter that I believe we're going to run into in the not so distant future, possibly in the next 10 years, maybe even sooner. I think the real deficit we're going to be preoccupied with is going to be literacy. And this saddens me to say because I'll never forget a story that my mom told me about an older lady she knew when my mom was young. She couldn't read. That older lady entrusted my mom to read personal documents to her for her to sign. On top of not being able to read, she couldn't really write either. So my mom was determined to hang out with this lady until she could independently sign her own papers at the very least. And I remember thinking, that is pretty sad. My mom is old enough to know people who genuinely missed out on school, missed out on becoming literate. When I was in school, learning about illiteracy, when I was in middle school, and even in high school, it came up, of course, during history classes. But I remember that the way we learned about it is that for voting, you used to have to pass a literacy test, but then they got rid of that. But when I thought about it, I said something as basic as reading, letters, symbols, recognition, writing, your own production of written content, in addition to your interpretation and absorption of written content at the very least. I just felt like that is something so automatic because you have practiced it, but I never really thought about how it took me practicing it via having dedicated teachers, a dedicated mother, for me to dominate being literate. But nowadays, I'm hearing and observing, witnessing myself where I work. I have had parents talk to children that appear to be at least 10, and they're having trouble reading the things that are written in product, say on the back of cereal boxes, chip bags, or those greeting cards. Sometimes I see parents, again, these are bigger children, telling them how something is supposed to be read, what something is supposed to be pronounced as. And it shocked me a bit because, sure, I hear about the illiteracy issues, like proficiency issues going on in our schools online, and I know it's everywhere, but for me to actually witness it in person like that, I feel like that needs to be explored more. The consequences we're going to face in the not so distant future when those kids in about 7, 8 years they start looking for jobs, if we can even count on people being able to look for jobs. But there's going to be a wave of people who are falling behind on being able to read and write. But even if you know how to work your phone, and of course, to use your phone, you need to know how to read and you need to know how to write to some extent. I worry about these kids who are going to be behind with that skill. What is the world going to look like with children who are illiterate? And when I think about things like that historically, I just remember in school, it was emphasized that becoming literate was one of the most important achievements you could have, because there are a lot of records that are in written form, information that you receive most often. For you to receive information in a speedy manner, you're going to get mail, you're going to get emails, you're going to receive texts. And if you're not able to really read something to comprehend it in your own time, what is a world like that going to look like? There's going to be people who are going to need to resort to older people who know how to read and write, say people like me. And these people will legit need help interpreting things. I have encountered people who legit do not know how to read. It wasn't a direct case for me. It's not like I actually directly knew this person, but I knew of this person who couldn't read, and that they could get by. But it was just interesting, but also a little sad to witness someone who couldn't be self sufficient, because this is a world that is built on you being able to read. But I thought that was just an isolated incident. Like, okay, this person missed out on their education because of personal life circumstances. We're not condemning you for that. That's not the point. It's just that observing that, I thought, okay, maybe this is my once in a lifetime potentially that I'm going to run into an adult with that status, just like my mom had her experience with that older lady who couldn't sign or read. I thought, okay, this is that person for me. But now I see a bunch of kids who legit are having trouble reading on their own. They need their parents to interpret some things for them. I have observed that 3 times in the past year. I also observed that once in a while I'll get a kid who goes through the checkout line and they'll pay in cash, and I'll hand them their change, hand them their receipt. And I have had one kid who debated me one time on how much change they thought they needed to be getting back. And I was like, well, your total was, I don't know, let's say $15. You gave me a 20, you're getting a 5 back. But for some reason, they felt like I owed them money. And fortunately, it just so happened that their parent was stepping right in to the register. They walked up to the counter and I was explaining the situation to them, and the parent decided to agree with me that, yeah, I gave them the right change. And then she proceeded to explain to the kid what the matter was. And I feel like from that instance, I may have picked up on a vibe that maybe this kid goes through that pretty often. Therefore, the mom was like equipped to handle the situation. I want to say it was an instance of the kid had either their own money or the parent gave them the money, and then she went to the bathroom or she went somewhere and then she came back, and it just so happened that he was checking out at that time. But I have also seen instances of the parents explaining to the kid who wants to buy something that they give me the money and they start to walk away. I tell them, give me just 1 second. And then the parent is like, don't go anywhere. You need to get your change. This kid is not reasoning that they gave me a bill that I must fraction for them and give them back the difference. And like I said, these are not little kids. They're not 5, 6, 7. These are very easily 10 to 11 to 12-year-olds. And one might say, well, in some future, we're not even going to be using cash that much anymore. I'm just saying that to me, when I was a kid, I remember I had a game of a cashier toy, you could say. It was, you had a tail with the dividers, and you had the segments for where the bills would go, the partition, and then you had the coins, and they were made of plastic, and the bills, of course, were made of paper. And I remember that I picked random stuff in my room and I tried to give it all prices, and I was playing with my mom. And I forget how much she started off with. Let's say she started off with like $150. And then I was telling her random numbers like, my school calculator is $8. My Nintendo controller is $20. I was just giving her crazy ass numbers. And anyway, so she was giving me the money. And I remember that that was the first faux transaction I ever processed. And what was funny is that the calculator that I was selling to her was the calculator that I was using to add up the prices that I was telling her everything cost. And then based off the money she gave me, I used my own calculator that I sold her to do that math. And then I remember mom saying something like, if you need the calculator to give me my money back, maybe you shouldn't sell it to me. So, that was my learning experience. I learned about my coins, and I remember that my mission was to try to count stuff as quickly as I could, but accurately, of course, because I remember as a kid, to me, it was impressive to observe cashiers counting money so quickly. And I knew that's not something I could do. I don't really remember playing that game very much, like just a handful of times. But eventually, looking at my life now, I grew up into being the very person that I admired. I ended up being a fast cashier who memorized all the codes, and on top of that, I can break down change pretty quickly. Those are memories that I have attached to my childhood that are relevant with my present. I wonder how many of these children, like say kids that were born, let's say in the early 2010s, what have their toys been like? I just remember when, as a child, my toys used to be representative of real life. I remember having toy dishes, toy housekeeping stuff. You see that at home and you see that at a job. With that money till that I just described to you guys, I had that toy. It translated into a real life event. When I went to school, what I was learning about, you knew that it was relevant for your real life. Let it be in the present at that time, or that it would be a part of your future. But now we live in times where everything changes so quickly. And now we're getting ready to see yet another change with money management, for instance, and how cash is, I wouldn't say it's rare, it's still a big portion of my day to day transactions, but I can tell you that compared to 10 years ago, I feel like I don't handle as much of it. But when I think about how I have grown and how I have learned versus these children, I sincerely think they're being left behind. And I also feel like in their day to day, they don't experience things that cultivates growth, cultivates development of basic skills that you could take anywhere and you could be helpful. You would be in shape to serve. I also observe that a lot of children don't have manners. Once in a while, I may encounter a kid that really is genuinely polite. Like the parents do not need to tell them, "What do you say? Don't forget to say," something like that. And I'm like, if by age 6 or 7, your child is like not automatically expressing gratitude without you serving as the prompt, I think that is a problem. And I've been observing that children are not expressing those social skills as early as I remember myself experiencing it, executing it, and witnessing it. And that is what I'm worried about. Because another example I can provide is when we see some of our younger candidates for jobs, some of these folks don't really have a sense of how to dress up for a job interview. And some of them don't really come prepared. They don't bring some kind of a profile. They don't engage in a very meaningful way to where you can convince our hiring managers to give you the opportunity. It's okay to be fresh out of high school, but at least show up to the interview with some knowledge about the company. And I remember that when I interviewed back in my day, one of the things that impressed who would become my manager at the time is that I knew some things. I did my research, and this is what they told me after I was hired. And I curiously asked them, "Hey, so how do you think I did?" Because that was my first interview ever, and I was super nervous. And they said, "Well, we were impressed by how you asked questions. You actually interviewed me. It demonstrated that you were interested in us as well. and that you had done at least your surface level research. You knew what you were walking into, and you were very prepared despite being inexperienced. And it looked like you were someone eager, willing, and ready to learn. And I said, all right, great, because that is sincerely how I am. But when I observe some of our candidates nowadays, I feel like people go into the interview with a degree of entitlement, like, okay, you landed the interview, therefore you are going to go somewhere with us. No, there is a process to this. There is a process to you selling yourself. And sometimes I wonder if this literacy challenge that I'm expressing is part of the problem. Maybe if these people did research in the form of, let me look up YouTube videos of people's experiences with their job interviews, and they absorb that auditorily, maybe that can help them get by. But at least for me, back in my day, I did a lot of reading and I did a lot of asking around. And that is where my preparedness to the best of my ability at the time came from. And I just worry that a lot of these younger folks these days don't know how to take that initiative, because what I took for granted, what feels like common sense, is actually becoming a skill now. And that's not a skill that everybody has. And I'm observing that some of these kids, to some extent, it really feels like their parents have left them behind. Maybe they don't do that deliberately. We don't know the circumstances of the parents, but it's evident that our schools have been in crisis for some time. And now I'm beginning to see the aftermath of all that, what it means for teachers to have been absent in some of these kids' lives. There's no telling how some of these kids made it through their grade levels. And I'm just saying, I think we need to talk about the education winter coming up as much as, I guess, the birth rate challenge. I think we're focusing too much on one thing. But even if we were to have a sudden baby boom, what is it going to mean if we cannot get these folks educated? And I hate saying this, in a hurried enough way, because modern days require that you learn a lot of things in a very short amount of time. So what is a future with folks like that, with, I guess, arrested development in their education, going to look like? What is that going to mean for us? So anyways, you guys, I thought I would throw that in here. I know I mentioned that from time to time. I randomly throw that here. But I thought that maybe we should officially have a label on this and, I don't know, discuss it from there. Do you guys live in a place where you feel like your children are educated decently? Do you think that everybody is up to level based on their age and grade level? Or do you think that they are falling behind? And honestly, I feel like I don't see as many children like I used to. And that is very indicative to me that, yeah, the birth rate crisis is real. And something I can tell you, you guys let me know if you observe the same thing. But here, the only people I see having children are the same people who have had children before. There are some women who, the past 4 years, I've known them or seen them, they've been pregnant almost that entire time. And I get maybe the occasional first time parent, but I can tell you that more often than not, I see the same parent having another child. It's evident that they're married, but sometimes I wonder, what's that about? Some married people be having more than 3 kids. How do y'all do it? But you can tell that these are people who are well off anyway. But I'm just saying, for the rest of us, like average, disappearing social class people, our opportunities and resources are different. I think the wisest thing I have done is not wanting kids, which is not really a choice I made. It's just I happen to have been born like that. But also as an adult, just continue to ensure that I don't end up having children, because I cannot tell you how I would cope with the fact that we are dealing with those challenges in school, and it's not like I can quit my job to become a stay at home school teacher. Like, I would love to homeschool a child, but I just know that I won't have those resources. I won't have the ability to do that. Do I feel like I'm qualified to teach? Yeah, absolutely. But I also gotta admit that there's some stuff that I won't be able to deliver. And that's what I worry about. I think I would be decent as a teacher up to like maybe grade 5 or so. I still have pretty vivid memories of my sixth grade through high school, of course, but when it comes to the complexity of some of those subjects, I'm not sure how I would go about teaching my own class outside of the organized school setting, and as a person who is not a professional. Like, I didn't go to college for this, I don't have the skills for this from an institution. It's I'm using my retention along with what I have obtained as an adult, and somehow apply that to my child's education. And I was randomly remembering how I keep remembering something in math called the box and whisker plot. And I remember that was easy, but I don't remember what it was. I wouldn't know how to teach it to someone unless I had a review of how to do it. So, anyways, you guys, that's it for me. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.